Welcome back to Sunday Evening Devotions. We return to our story of Hezekiah in 2 Kings, and we want to look at the rest of chapter 18 and 19 tonight, as Hezekiah had to face his worldly enemies. You remember that Hezekiah started out well, and that he had done many religious reforms, and God had blessed him, and he became secure in his kingdom. Perhaps you have received an important letter in the mail, and perhaps as you opened that letter, it had in it bad news that disturbed you. And so as you looked at this letter and all that it said, you laid it before the Lord and prayed over it. Well, this is what God does with Hezekiah in our story tonight. As you may remember, Assyria was on the march. It was the growing world empire. And under Shalmaneser, Assyria had come into the land and taken Israel to the north, the northern kingdom, captive. Well, 8 years later, Assyria comes again. This time it's Sennacherib who's king. And he threatens Judah, and he takes easily Judah's fortifications to its north and leaves Jerusalem undefended. Now, it is at this moment that Hezekiah, having been blessed by God, realizes that he's against a power much beyond him and is threatened. And we may say at this point he wavers in his faith. It seems that in his strength and his perhaps pride, he stood against Assyria and refused payment as a tribute to the king, and so Sennacherib threatens him. And so now being faced with that onslaught of a world power, Hezekiah agrees to make payment plus interest and the dues, and so he is required to pay a large sum of silver and gold, and he has to empty the king's treasuries as well as strip the gold from the Lord's house that he had put there. Hezekiah probably hoped that this would buy him more time and put him in good graces, but apparently God uses this to test Hezekiah even more, so that Sennacherib, upon receiving the money, then returns by sending his general to threaten Jerusalem. And perhaps what's going on in the world politics of the time was that Ethiopia was now a threat to the growing empire designs of Assyria, and Assyria did not want Hezekiah, a strong king, to be an enemy of theirs on their flank, on an unprotected flank if they had to go further south. And so Sennacherib decides, as it were, to take Hezekiah out. Well, the representative, the Rabshakeh of Sennacherib, then threatens Jerusalem. And he comes in person and speaks and tells the people of Jerusalem that they shouldn't trust in the Lord, and that all the other kingdoms have given way and the other gods have failed, and they had no reason to trust in God, and he was very blasphemous against the Lord God. But the people held their peace, and they were quiet, and they listened to these things. And so Hezekiah took these things to heart and went before the Lord and asked what Isaiah the prophet, what God would do. And God assures him that indeed he would provide for him. However, Sennacherib then again orders Rabshakeh to repeat the threat. Now Rabshakeh then sends the letter, and the letter comes, and Hezekiah again takes it before the Lord and lays it before him. And Isaiah promises that God will deliver him, and that he will remove the threat, and that in fact they will be able to sow and reap as if Assyria never existed. And so God confirms his promise to Hezekiah, blesses him. And what we find then is Hezekiah then trusts in the Lord that Sennacherib is defeated, And then as he returns to his country, he is killed. Now, Sennacherib is defeated by a great and powerful thing. We're told in 2 Kings chapter 19 that the angel of the Lord went out and killed in the camp the Assyrians 185,000. And there were corpses all around. So God immediately attacks and defends his people and humbles Sennacherib. And so it's a miraculous salvation. And the people of the world don't understand that, but they think that it's something that Hezekiah has done, or his God has done on behalf of him because he's a great king. So what do we learn from this story? Well, what I think is happening here, God certainly is testing the faith of Judah, the people of Judah, and Hezekiah. What we find is that Hezekiah, being placed as the king at this time, is acting as the mediator king. He's the one who God has placed on the throne and is a picture of Jesus who intercedes for his people. Hezekiah being blessed by God, then while he is in this position, then twice goes before the Lord on behalf of the people, recognizing that, in fact, God was against them, that this was, God was just in dealing with them, but he was trusting in the promises of God, the covenant that God had made with David, and was interceding that God would keep his promises, that he'd ultimately be on the side of his people. And so Hezekiah fulfills that role, but not perfectly, as we've seen. He wavered. He didn't trust. He had pride. And yet, he's a picture of the Messiah to come for us. And of course, that's the picture that we need, a true Messiah, one who will be a faithful intercessor for us in all things, that is Jesus Christ the Lord. And of course, this is a reminder that our faith is always tested, and our faith will always be weak, but it is God's own covenant promises that will be kept, and it is God himself who will save us, not we ourselves or anything that we do, even as the angel of the Lord, the presence of God, would come and destroy and defeat his enemies. A reminder that, indeed, there will be judgment, and God will ultimately deliver his people. And this all points us to Jesus, and shows us how we must trust ourselves to him, because he is our great King, our great deliverer. Well, that's good news. Good night.